Hi everyone, so welcome back from your break, and we can just take a moment. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk, as we said, about some kind of practical applications. So the title of my presentation today is Mindfulness, Supporting Healthy Families and Communities. And so I just want to start by kind of taking a moment to recognize what we mean maybe by healthy families and communities. And so this will mean something different to each of us, but I want to share a definition of well-being that I like. And this comes from a study that was actually done on physicians' well-being to see what it meant for them. And it says that wellness includes not just the absence of distress or illness, but also emotional well-being, physical health, and social relationships. And so, we want to recognize, while we're hearing about lots of exciting research today, that there's also this kind of other component to wellness that we want to look at that maybe goes beyond an official diagnosis, what the kind of formal plan is for taking care of that diagnosis. But around these kind of formal pieces of taking care of ourselves, taking care of our families and our children, are the informal pieces, right? Those are the ways that we speak to one another as we drive to an appointment with a physician. Those are the ways that we listen to one another at the dinner table. Those are the ways that we are or are not taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of the people around us. And these kind of informal pieces are what we're really interested in when we talk about mindfulness practice. Just the different ways that we may or may not be caring for ourselves because they aren't the ways that we're being told that we have to on paper. And these start to talk to some of the things that can happen around the absence of well-being, right? So the stress that we experience around a diagnosis, the stress we experience at work, the stress we experience at school. And so when I talk about mindfulness for supporting healthy families and communities, these are the pieces that we're speaking to. How can we, outside of the work that we're doing with our physicians, outside of medications that may be supporting us, which are all fantastic, how are we able ourselves to build in health? And so that's what we're going to be exploring today. So before I go any further, it's just a little helpful for me to know about who is here. So if I could ask, could you raise your hand if you have any kind of mindfulness practice that you currently do? Okay, so a few of us. Great. Put your hands down. Raise your hand if you've ever tried any mindfulness thing. This could be yoga or anything at all. Okay. So a number of you. Great. Maybe raise your hand if you're like, why do I have to sit through a mindfulness thing? This is weird. No one wants to admit it. It's fine if you're here. Welcome. We're just exploring. That's okay. So we're going to continue with just starting to talk a little bit about what mindfulness is. Now, I want to let you know we are also going to try out some activities. So this is going to be a bit of a mixture of hands-on and me talking. But just to start, I love this slide because we hear mindfulness a lot. It's gotten quite popular. It's in the news. We have articles, but maybe we don't know exactly what it actually is. So I like to think of mindfulness as an exploration of our minds, starting to think about what is going on up there. And again, just by a show of hands, whose mind more often in their day-to-day lives maybe looks like what we see on the right-hand side here, the kind of busy, active mind. Yeah, I had trouble falling asleep last night because I was making a grocery list for a dinner that I'm hosting tonight, and I was happy to have a mindfulness practice. So in mindfulness, we're going to start to kind of just observe and examine what kind of minds we have and different ways to take care of different states that we might experience. So there isn't one working definition of mindfulness, and as I get to this slide, I realize I have been unmindful and not fully introduced myself to tell you why I'm the one up here talking about this. So I'm going to share these two definitions with you. Before I do, I'll just briefly share. I myself am a PhD student here in the Faculty of Medicine at the Institute of Medical Science, and I'm actually studying the impacts of mindfulness on physicians and their relationships to their patients and their own well-being. I have a background, my master's was focused on bringing mindfulness into education and looking how mindfulness can impact learning and learning environments and relations between students, parents, and teachers. So this is an area of passion for me. And on a personal note, I actually went to my first retreat when I was 10 years old. My dad is a physician and my mom is a theater director. And between those two perspectives, they thought this might be interesting. So we went to a retreat with someone named Thich Nhat Hanh. And he's good to introduce because the first definition here actually comes from his organization. So I'll just introduce him very briefly because he's my long-term mindfulness teacher. He came out of Vietnam during the Vietnam War, speaking out against the war. And he actually used mindfulness as a way to organize youth in the country, to take care of themselves, rebuild villages, and through this work met with Martin Luther King, who nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. So the activities we're going to try out today come from what we call engaged mindfulness, which is this idea that it's not necessarily just sitting alone on a cushion in a room, but you can actually use it actively in your everyday life. And the founder of engaged mindfulness was my teacher at 10 years old, Thich Nhat Hanh, and also the founder of what we call the Plum Village community. So that's a little bit about who I am and why I'm up here talking to you. So back to our two definitions. We have two here because there is no one agreed upon definition of mindfulness. But I particularly like these two, so a little bias in there from me. So the first one, mindfulness is the awareness of what is happening inside and around us in the present moment. Dan Siegel, who's an interpersonal neurobiologist that we're going to talk about soon when we talk about the brain, likes to say that mindfulness is simple but not easy. So I want us to remember that. So very simple definition, just awareness of what's happening right now. That isn't an easy thing to do, but we're going to talk about how to do that. The important things that I've kind of bolded here are the word awareness, which is related to attention, so our ability to on purpose focus the attention of our mind. We're going to come back to that principle. And this idea of the present moment is really important. When we get into how mindfulness can help us in our day-to-day lives, coming back to the present moment is going to be a key part of it. And the present moment is not, sometimes I say this and people think I sound a little like hippie, like present moment. But what we're getting into here is this idea that our mind, our busy mind, can really transport us to the future or the past, and that actually our default mode, there's something in our brain called the default mode network. Our default mode is to actually be mind wandering. The ability to focus our attention is actually a learnable and trainable skill, but isn't where we normally are. And again, just by a show of hands, who in this room, since I've started talking, has thought about something happening in the future or the past? Right, so we're all doing this all the time. So when we get into kind of what mindfulness might help us do, it's going to start to help us learn how to focus our attention and bring it to the present moment. And we're going to talk about why that's helpful. The second definition comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who's the founder of MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, fantastic program that's actually being offered in a lot of the hospitals downtown. He says mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And so we have that word present moment again, we have attention, but the thing I want to point to here, because this is going to be really important when we actually try out some activities, is the concept of non-judgment. This is maybe a different way than we go about our regular lives. Often when I introduce non-judgment when I'm working with youth, and I'll try throughout this presentation to really talk about how I share this with young people so we can think about how to do that. When we share about non-judgment, I'll often ask a group, what are some ways that you don't judge other people? And this can be kind of easy to answer. I shouldn't judge someone by the clothes they're wearing or their haircut. But then I like to ask the question, what are some ways that we judge ourselves? And this can sometimes be a little trickier to get our heads around. But it's often a lot of the same things. You know, I woke up this morning and was like, what is my hair doing today? And that's just a little judgment. You may have judged the clothes you were wearing, how long it took you to get here, you know, all these little things. And I like to say that our judgment of ourselves are kind of some microaggressions that we may be hitting ourselves with throughout the day that we are not aware of. And so a very basic mindfulness practice that we can already start to explore just from the definitions are, how am I judging myself? And how can I bring some on-purpose attention and awareness to these judgments to alleviate some stress for myself? And so that's already a mindfulness practice that we get just from the definitions. And as I mentioned earlier, as families, you know, dealing with different challenges throughout your lives that come from many different places, not just health, you have many, many opportunities to be judgmental about yourself. I could have spoken nicer. I was too sharp there. I should have had more patience, right? You already have challenges to deal with. You don't need to add the suffering of also being judgmental of yourself, of how you are dealing with them. And yet we do this all the time. And so I just really want to invite you, as you go through this presentation and we try out different activities, first off, don't judge if you're doing them right or wrong, because because there's no right or wrong when we are just bringing awareness. And secondly, if you have one practice to start doing right now, it's just to start bringing some of your on-purpose attention to your judgments. So maybe I'm going to talk too fast, you can judge me for that. I'm going to say something weird, you can judge me for that. You can judge yourself for now having your mind wander and, oh, you're supposed to be paying attention. All of these things are now your practice for the next 15 minutes to be kind to them. Because non-judgment is at the heart of it about developing compassion and kindness towards yourself and others. So I really invite you for the next 15 minutes of this presentation, whether you love what happens or really don't like it, to offer yourself kindness for whatever comes up. So those are just some starting points. So as we said, simple, not easy. But we'll continue on now. I'm going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about some of the neuroscience that's supporting our findings of the importance of mindfulness, where it fits in your life. I'm going to do this a little quickly so that we can kind of get to trying out some of the practices. When I introduce mindfulness to all ages, this includes kindergarten, I love introducing these two parts of your brain. So we're really simplifying the brain a little bit here, but we're going to focus on the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And you may have heard of these two parts of the brain, but the amygdala is the part of your brain that's in charge of your fight or flight response, which you may have heard of. And this is, the part of your body that's in charge of assessing whether you are in danger or whether you're safe, and making a very quick judgment on that. And if it decides that you aren't safe, it's going to trigger your HPA system, which is basically a chemical response that's going to get you ready to fight or run. Now, this response is really fantastic for survival. If you meet a tiger in the woods, you really want your amygdala to kick off this cascade of chemicals in your body so that you can fight or get away from a tiger, right? Really great. Where this response is maybe not as useful is if you are having a difficult conversation with a colleague. If you are a student and you walk into a classroom and someone who's been bullying you is sitting on the other side of the room, they're not even talking to you right now, but you see them, your amygdala perceives danger, sets off a chemical reaction, and what that chemical reaction does is not only get you ready to fight or flight, but it's going to take your prefrontal cortex, which we're going to talk about in a moment, offline. So your prefrontal cortex, right at the front of your brain, is in charge of your executive functions. You can think of this like the part of your brain that makes logical and wise decisions. So you can imagine if the chemicals take it offline, what impact this might have. And what happens when we go offline is we are no longer to make logical, rational, kind decisions. We are simply reacting. And what I like about this is, again, bringing in mindful awareness. Sometimes we might judge ourselves, be like, why can't I handle this situation better? I should do better. If our amygdala has taken over and we're having an amygdala response, we can't do better. We are in a moment of reaction. We are in a moment of protecting ourselves. And so what we need to do is have something that can switch us from an amygdala response to bringing our prefrontal cortex back online. And this is where mindfulness can come in. Before I move on from this, just to kind of lay down the learning, you can do this with me if you want. We're just going to lay down the learning of the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And I do this with little kids, so we can raise up our hand, and we can imagine that this is going to be our brain stem, kind of part of our brain that dips into our bodies, that kind of checks out what's going on. And then if we bend in our thumb like this, our thumb is going to represent our amygdala, which actually means almonds. It's a little almond-sized part of our brain. Sometimes we call it the reptile brain. It's an old part that's in charge of these responses. And then if we bend our hands down like this, we're going to complete our brain, and this is going to represent our prefrontal cortex, and that's the part that helps us make good decisions. Again, very simplified. Your brain has a lot more going on than this, but if we only remember two parts, these are really helpful for why we have big reactions. And we can remember what the reaction is because we call it flipping our lid. We go offline. And it can actually be a nice experiment around the dinner table or just even between partners to discuss even some recent times where we had an amygdala reaction versus a prefrontal cortex reaction. And just bringing, again, awareness to why we're having these responses can really change what the response looks like. I was working in a grade 3 class that had many different spectrums in it, and I had a kid run in after recess and be like, Elli, I reacted with my amygdala. And I was like, oh, what did you do? And he was like, well, someone kicked me and I kicked them back. And I was like, oh, Okay, what did you do next? And he was like, well, I decided to practice the breathing techniques we did. So we did one to bring our prefrontal cortex back online, which was that when we flip our lid, we follow an in-breath for each finger to invite our cortex to come back online. We're going to talk about the science behind that. And I said, great, what happened after you did that? He said, well, then I apologized. And I thought that was great. And so this was a student in grade 3. So understanding our minds is fun. We can apply it. I walked into my house the other day and said to my husband, I just had a conversation. I'm in amygdala mode. And he said, okay. And he just gave me space, and we didn't have to talk more than that. We both knew what was happening. So, the science can also be kind of a fun, playful thing that we can bring in to our mindfulness practice. And so just to recap a little bit about what happens when our brain has a stress response, so that means our amygdala has been triggered. Our amygdala can be triggered by all kinds of things, an actual tiger or what we call paper tigers. So paper tigers, we actually have research showing that sitting in front of an exam for students in high school can trigger the HPA reaction, right? Not a helpful moment to have your prefrontal cortex go offline. And we can even imagine, you wouldn't run through the woods with someone who is being chased by a bear and ask them to learn the multiplication tables. But we do ask young people and even ourselves to apologize or speak nicely to others when we're feeling triggered. So this is, again, just to bring your attention and awareness to where some of these responses may be coming from, so you can have more compassion for yourself when you have them, more compassion for your family, and also just the people around you. And so where mindfulness fits in, and what's interesting about the research studies, is that we see without mindfulness, so we have a stimulus, someone kicks me in the playground, my reaction, I kick them back. If we have mindfulness, it kind of fits in the middle between the stimulus and what we can call a response. Someone kicks me, I immediately come back to my breathing, I know that I need to walk away before I can respond. And so we see a lot of research saying that this is really possible, and that mindfulness can help us learn the skills to focus our attention and have different choices because of that between reaction and response. And so that's a very exciting thing. So how do we do this? What I like to call mental fitness. So a lot of the time, we like to think that we'll just apply something when we need it. And so when I share this with young people, and you can think about this for yourself, I often ask, is there anything that anyone practices? So I might ask for some of our young people in the audience, if anyone wants to share, and if not, we can also ask our adults in the audience, does anyone here practice anything? Does anyone here play any sports? Yeah. Oh, you play piano. Wonderful. And what do you practice? And why do you practice playing piano?
It helps to improve the intellectual performance, what the notes sound like.
Yeah, so it helps improve the notes, how you understand them.
To identify what key the respondent.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was just what I was looking to hear. So we practice to improve. That's why we do that. And if we don't practice, then our skill set will go down. And so just like you just gave us that great example of improving at piano, we can think about our mental fitness like this. If we aren't practicing, we can't improve. And if we're not practicing, our skill set will go down. And we actually see this at a synaptic level in your brains. You can strengthen your synapses based on where you are putting your attention, and you can weaken them if you're not putting your attention there. And so if we want to learn how to take care of ourselves, we actually have to actively be involved in building those connections in our brains. And so a lot of the recent research coming out about mindfulness speaks to this and is looking at actual structural and functional changes in the brains of experienced meditators. So that's the case for it, but let's try it out, because in my experience, mindfulness is very experiential. So we're actually going to try a few mindfulness practices right now, so you can kind of see what it does to your own mind. So all of us are going to be part of these experiments. I like to think about mindfulness as an experiment, because remember, we want to be non-judgmental, and it's simple but not easy. So, I want you to imagine this. If you've never done a mindfulness practice, this is like you're walking in to try ballet for the first time, or shooting a basketball into the net. You might not be very skilled at it, and that's totally fine. because we're practicing non-judgment. So that means that during the practice, if your mind is busy, if you're not able to focus on the instructions, what I want you to do is just see if you can notice those thoughts. Because remember, at the very simplest end, mindfulness is awareness. So the skill building, I like to say the mental weightlifting of mindfulness, is not having a moment of complete perfection. It's having a moment of noticing my mind is busy, noticing that I don't like this activity, noticing that I'm planning my grocery list for later. When you notice your mind go, try and bring it back, and that's the weightlifting. That's what allows us to start building these muscles of attention, awareness, present moment focus, and that's what lets us know how to take care of our reactions. So we're going to try a practice, and before I do, I'm going to introduce 3 foundational elements of mindfulness. You can apply these anywhere. I apply them to sending emails, I apply them to walking down the street, so you can really play with this. So the present moment awareness, we've talked a bit about this. So the workout is noticing what your thoughts are, being kind to them, and then refocusing them on the task, and that's going to be a practice that we do together. Today we're going to use a bell as a reminder to notice, and it is a bit of a sharp sound, so I'm going to do a test run of it before I use it to make sure everyone in the room feels safe and isn't surprised. Really important if you ever bring a sound into any space. But we're going to use a bell. You can really use any sound, but it just helps us to kind of have something to bring our attention to. And then breath as the anchor to the mind. So what's great about your breathing is it's always with you. You don't have to remember to pack it. So I love to have my breathing as something to focus on. So during the activity, if you are like, my mind has totally left and I totally can't focus, okay, I know that. Great, I'm doing the thing where I know that my mind is busy. What do I do next? You bring it back to your breathing. And if you're focused on your breathing, your mind is in the present moment. So it's a nice kind of circle there. So I'm going to just test out the sound. So is everyone ready? There's going to be a sound. This is what it sounds like. Okay? So we're going to hear that a few times, so just be ready if that might be something that surprises you. So we're going to quickly, because I'm mindful of the time and I want to teach a few more things, we're going to stand up if we want, or we can stay sitting. It's up to you, but if you need to stand for this, can be a nice way to wake up. We're going to do some mindful movements right where you're standing, so you don't have to go anywhere, but you can stand up for a moment. So what I'm about to do with you is the same basic principles that I do when I do a sitting meditation, but I find often for those of us who have busy minds, that sitting with our eyes closed can actually be quite uncomfortable, and so I like to do it standing up. What we're going to do right now may feel a little funny. It may look a little funny that we're all doing it together, so I'm so happy that you are all practicing non-judgment. So the first thing that we're going to do is, if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. If you don't want to close your eyes, pick a point to look at in front of you. That will just make the activity a little more challenging because you still have more sensory inputs. So if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes and put your hands on your belly. And what I invite you to do is just see if you can let your mind rest on the sensation of your belly filling with air and then falling as the air goes out. And I really want to invite you to allow this intention of focusing your breath on your belly breathing to be a moment for you to stop your mind and your body from rushing, from leaving the space. And if we have thoughts come in or other distractions, sounds, movement, notice them. You can even label them sound, thought, and then see if you can get your mind to come back to the sensation of your breathing. Just allowing your mind to rest and be an observer of itself. And now what I'm going to invite us to do, being aware of the space around us, is to gently, on your next in-breath, just raise your arms up above your head. As you breathe in, let your mind rest on the feeling of movement. And when you breathe out, gently bring your arms down, just as far as is safe, coming down in front of you. And what I want to invite you to do is to do this just for the next half a minute at your own pacing. Don't change or adjust your breathing. Try and get your arm to hit the top of where you're reaching at the end of your in-breath, and then come down as far as your arms come down at the end of your out-breath. I'm going to let us do this in silence and really invite your mind and body to stop, focus, and observe, coming back to your breath whenever you notice your mind running. Aware of any thoughts coming in, sending them kindness, coming back to the movement or your breath. And on your next out breath, just bring your arms down, and then we can return to our seats. And just take a moment. I like to think of even a short practice like this as an opportunity to collect some data on yourself that you might not have had. So what's going on in your body? Does it feel the same or different than before? How about your mind? You might feel calmer, or you might feel more anxious. Sometimes when we stop, we only ever do this right before we fall asleep. We discover actually that we're very worried about something. So that's okay. Maybe I can ask, does anyone want to share just anything that they noticed during that practice? Just a brief 1 or 2 words about anything that came up for you, felt weird, felt good, felt bad. Anyone brave enough to share? Yeah.
Felt like when I was doing the movements with my arms and in conjunction with my breath, it actually helped me focus a little better.
Right, so adding in the movement actually made you more maybe focused or aware of your breathing. And that's a great thing, especially, when we're working with young people who maybe have some focus issues. To ask them to sit still with their eyes closed is not realistic, so to bring in some movement can be really helpful for focus. Yeah, there's someone over here. You just started to relax, yeah. And so we did that practice for 1 minute. And so just to say in our lives, sometimes we don't think we have time to take care of ourselves. 3 breaths with attention and focus can really take care of us. And so we always have time for that. Sometimes I say it's called the restroom for a reason. Don't go in there and check your emails. Go in there and rest for just 1 minute. So you can start to think about where this fits in your life. So I'm just going to jump through 2 other quick things. Can I take 3 more ones? Okay. Just a few other practices that we can try out in our lives. So moving this beyond just the breath awareness, which you can take home with you right now, bring it to movement, bring it to walking, whatever you like, is also how we start to handle our emotions. And so I'm going to ask a question. Please raise your hand if you've ever pretended to be happy, but secretly you were sad. Look around, okay. Please raise your hand if you've ever pretended to be happy, but secretly you were angry. Wow, we all do this all the time. Okay, so this is a way to also bring our awareness to something else, our attention in the present moment, which is everyone here goes around pretending to be happy when they secretly feel other ways. And I like to ask young people why we do this. And what I hear back is we do this to protect the people around us. Because if we tell them how we really feel, they may feel bad about that. And we also do it to protect ourselves. Because if we tell someone how we feel, we become vulnerable. And this is a social contract that is very acceptable. You cannot always walk into your work and tell everyone how you are feeling. However, if we spend our whole lives doing this, we will not have a sense of well-being. We will not always know how we are feeling, and we won't know what's going on for the people around us. And this can be very difficult, especially when we're parents and we want to care for the people around us. We deeply want to protect them. And so this social contract is about protection. And so I want to also invite you to bring your mindful awareness to how often you are protecting yourself and the people around you by being the apple behind the Post-it note. And when are the moments where you can remove the Post-it note and be your true self? Because that is really important for your well-being. And so there's a really short activity that I'm going to introduce now that starts to help us to navigate this question. And so we call it the weather check-in, and it's really simple. All it is at any time of day in a journal to yourself or the people around you, you explain what your current weather emotions are. So you might be having a bright sunny day. You might be having a bright sunny day with a chance of thunderstorms later. You may be having constant tornadoes. Whatever it is, you say your emotions as weather. And You don't have to explain why it's your weather. You can decide to add that in if you want, but for this practice that we're going to do very quickly right now, I'm going to ask that you simply, very shortly with no explanation, we're going to just do it with the people around us that we know, and if we don't know, we can just look for a partner. It will take 30 seconds. You don't have to explain it, and I'm going to ask that you keep it confidential. So that means you won't talk about it outside of this room without that person's permission. So if a family member turns to you right now and says, I'm all thunderstorms, and you didn't know that, you can offer them a smile, but you're not going to ask why right now. And when you leave this room, you could say, I'd like to know more about your thunderstorms. And if they say, I don't want to share about that right now, then we leave it, okay? So this is our confidentiality agreement. Is everyone okay? I see nods. If you're not, you can tap out. But I'm just going to invite you now, as I said, for time, we're going to do this very quickly. Take 30 seconds-ish. Just someone around you, just turn to them, and you're just going to share what your current weather emotion forecast is today. Go ahead. Oh. So we'll take about 10 more seconds. All right, so I'll ask you to come back. If you didn't have a chance to share, maybe you can do it later. But thank you for trying that out. The weather check-in is a great practice that we can do at dinner with our partners and even just with ourselves, just to start to become aware of what might be going on that we can't see. So with that, should I take 2 questions or just? Yeah. Okay, so with that, we're just going to quickly take 2 questions, and then I'm happy to answer some more later. But are there any questions about what we've been doing? Yeah.
In terms of talking about stuff like a meltdown that a kid has, so that's obviously amygdala kicking in. What do we do about that when you can't rationalize with them? You can't tell them to breathe. They're probably going to hit you.
Yes. Yes, when the meltdown is happening, maybe not the best time to say breathe, unless you've practiced it already. And so this is where we talk about mental fitness, is introducing mindfulness is best done not at the moment of difficulty. So if we start to bring these practices into our lives at calm times, then when we hit a moment like that, we can actually start to bring it in. I like to call it first reaction, second reaction. So my first reaction is my amygdala totally melting down. My second reaction is when my prefrontal cortex is back online. And what we see in the research is that the more we're practicing on a regular basis to strengthen the skill set, the sooner our second reaction can come in to support us and even sometimes replace the first one. So certainly we need to be kind if we want to bring this in. It takes time and practice. We won't always fix and change things right away. But the person who can use mindfulness immediately in the moment of the meltdown is the parent. How we're speaking to our child, how much their meltdown is hitting us, right? All of that, we can start taking care of ourselves right away by following our breath. So there's kind of 2 sides of it, but a great question. And to just think about also for yourself, when the meltdown's happening, I know the cortex is offline. So forcing this to be better right now isn't possible, can be very relieving on its own for yourself. Yeah.
Can I add one little thing?
Yeah.
Not to us, it's expertise, but there are a couple of curricula available now in Ontario for our kids that teach mindfulness, even when our cognitive skills are not what's expected for age. And one for those of you who are in Toronto is My Mind. That's actually in several places in Ontario, and I'm happy to give you the information after I send the link.
Fantastic, yeah, and 2 good books. There's one called Mind Up, which is a curriculum that's science and practice-based, and one is called The Mindful Teen, but it's a fantastic book for all ages, so if you want, you can look into those. One more question, and then if anyone wants to come up afterwards, I'm happy to chat, yeah.
Well, you mentioned mindfulness as a tool for building focus and for stopping your mind from wandering. I wonder, are there guidelines or research on distinguishing what you call maybe anxious or stressful wandering from sort of healthy wandering that might actually be very useful in creative or high cognitive demanding?
Yeah, absolutely. So a question just about, is mind wandering always like this unhealthy thing we want to control, or is there also research around it being helpful? So there's a reason that our default mode network likes to mind wander. It's actually like great for survival. It's great for creativity. It's great to like check out what's going on around you. It has to do with like self-reference and understanding what your place is in a social setting. So a great other piece is we're not trying to like, mindfulness is not necessarily just about like only ever always be focused in this one way or you're not, being effective. That there are many mind states that kind of help us to do different types of activities. And the practice of attention focus actually in the field of mindfulness is just one area. There's a lot of things in mindfulness about interbeing. How are we connected to others? How do we take care of our planet? So a great question is this presentation is really focused on this kind of one piece of the practice of mindfulness, but there are many ways that we can use it in our lives. So I'm really happy to kind of hang out for a bit and chat if anyone wants. Here are some other resources if you're interested. The Mindfulness Project at Sick Kids is fantastic, offering classes for parents and kids. I'm also happy to be in touch if there are questions that you don't have time to ask me now. And thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.